Welcome to Geo College Radio. I'm Miles King, joined by my co-host Jordan Linderman, as always. How are you doing today, Jordan?
I'm doing great, Miles. No loss suffered by the Razorbacks this weekend, so I'm very excited for the week to come to not be coming off of a loss from the most previous weekend.
Well, I'm sure that is a great feeling, especially considering the losses Arkansas has recently suffered. Let's go on to a team that did not suffer a loss this weekend, actually picked up a resounding victory, an emphatic victory, one could say. Oklahoma State defeated the West Virginia Mountaineers 37-20. They took down the top 10 ranked West Virginia squad. Mike Gundy earned his 100th victory, and he catapulted the Cowboys right back into the Big 12 title race.
Oh yeah, it's going to come down to the Sooners and the Cowboys for the Big 12. I think Baylor's going to fall apart in the end, and I just don't see this West Virginia team consistently competing against perennial Big 12 favorites like Oklahoma State and OU and even Texas. So Texas was able to upset Baylor this weekend, and we'll get to that game later. But I definitely think it's going to come down to the two Okie schools, and Oklahoma State seems to be the best team in the Big 12. I know Mike Gundy's fighting for the Central Michigan loss to be vacated, and I'm sure on Tuesday, whenever they come out with the college football playoff rankings, that'll be taken into consideration. I think this Oklahoma State team is going to be ranked a lot higher than they are in the AP poll, especially after this solid win over a West Virginia team that hadn't really been phased a whole lot. There had been a couple of close games, but they really seemed in control of most of their games for the whole season. And then they waltzed into Stillwater on homecoming, and that's not a place you want to go. America's greatest homecoming, as a lot have coined it. But this Oklahoma State team, the defense especially, played lights out, forcing 3 turnovers, and the offense was very responsible. They had no turnovers, and they really controlled the game. They were able to keep time of possession relatively close, almost identical, in fact. So really not letting West Virginia hold on to the ball for too long, and I just think they out-game planned the Mountaineers in this matchup.
Yeah, I like the word you used there, responsible offense. It wasn't they weren't lining up the box score. The rushing game, you might have wondered what happened to the OSU rushing game, but Justice Hill and Chris Carson, they had quite a few runs that were some tough, valuable yards, but those don't quite show up in the box score that you see. But it was a responsible game by the offense. They executed their game plan to perfection. Lots of teams struggle against the 3-3-5 of the West Virginia defense, and the Cowboy coaching staff with Gundy and Yursich did a great job of game planning for this specific scheme, and it really paid off. You could see that. And the defense, this is what they're built to do. They're built to turn the ball over, get it back to the offense, and they did that excellently in this game. Like you said, they forced 3 turnovers. They gave the ball back to the offense inside the 15-yard line all 3 times. You can't ask for anything more from your defense. Held the Mountaineers for the most part to well below how they've been performing so far this season. And I'd have to agree with you. I think it is going to come down to OSU versus OU for the Big 12 title. TCU, Tech, both out of the race now. It really is a 4-team race between OSU, OU, West Virginia, and Baylor. And of those teams, OSU has already faced 2 of those, and of those, OU has not faced any yet. So there could be a massive shakeup going into the end. If OSU just takes care of its business against K-State and Texas Tech, they could be in the driver's seat on December 3rd when they face OU and Norman.
So, Miles, what do you think of this Oklahoma State team? If you're the Texas Tech athletic director or anyone else in the College Football Playoff Committee, where are you placing this Oklahoma State Cowboys team with 2 losses, one with an asterisk, of course, and then a close one to Baylor?
I think they deserve to be in the 15 to 20 range, maybe even a few spots more than that. I think 15, 16 is about right, because it was a very close loss to Baylor on the road. And Baylor, they're not a playoff caliber team, I wouldn't say, but they've still got a decent squad, and of course, the asterisk loss to Central Michigan. And like you said, Gundy has been campaigning the past couple of days to get that removed, hire an attorney.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to do it. But hopefully the college football playoff will see that and just view OSU as a one-loss team. Like I said, I think if they just take care of their business against K-State and Texas Tech, you could see a move into the top 10 by the time they head down to Norman. And who knows if the cards fall right and they went out here, maybe even nick a spot into the playoff if complete chaos happens at the top and sneak into that number 4 spot. Anything can happen in college football, as we've seen on a week-to-week basis.
And Miles, if they go through the round robin victorious in the Big 12, they'll be waltzing into the Sugar Bowl playing possibly a Texas A&M team, and they've seen Trevor Knight before. That could be a game where they steal one from the Aggies.
Yeah, that would be an excellent matchup if the Aggies were matched up with the Cowboys down in New Orleans. I think a matchup a lot of people would be excited about. Maybe some animosity still there between the Aggies and the Cowboys because of Texas A&M going to the SEC. But Oklahoma State, they essentially control their destiny because I don't think that Baylor is getting through the season without another loss. They still have West Virginia and OU to play. I think they're going to drop another one at some point.
I think they're going to have 3 losses by the end of the year.
Wow. I wouldn't be too surprised at that. But I definitely think, and of course they have a tough game, a rivalry game against TCU this week. So if OSU wins out, they take care of their business. I think they'll definitely be Big 12 champs. Now on to our next game. This was the primetime matchup of the week as the number 3 Clemson Tigers went down to Tallahassee to face the Florida State Seminoles. And it was the Tigers that came out on top 37-34 in a very exciting matchup. Much more than I was anticipating. Dalvin Cook had an amazing game, ran for 116 yards, averaging 9 yards a carry, had 4 touchdowns. He was ripping off long runs left and right, but in the end, Deshaun Watson and the Clemson offense was too much for the Seminoles as they overcame them and ended up winning in the end.
Yeah, I think the story of this game is that this Florida State team they've been counted out the whole season. Or ever since they lost those 2 games early in the season. And so this is a team that should not be counted out ever. I mean, they're always ready to play. They've just played great teams so far. They lost to a great North Carolina team and an Ole Miss team that they either come to play or they don't. It was like the Ole Miss teams a couple of years ago when you got good Bo or bad Bo. Now you've got good Chad or bad Chad. And so this Florida State team is a really good team. Their defense has got to step up. They're consistently giving up way too many yards, way too many deep passes and long runs. And Deshaun Watson was able to expose that. Everyone knows that's the best part of his game is the long ball. And so he was really able to take advantage of that pretty much the whole game. And, of course, having Wayne Gallman back was great for the Tigers. But it didn't feel as close as it was. I honestly felt like the Tigers were going to win the whole time. But that's a sneaky part of this Florida State team. We took them for granted just because of their record, but they've played some great teams and they deserve a little bit more respect. Not in the polls. I think that the polls, they should be a little bit lower, but whenever you're in preparation for this team, looking directly at their defensive stats isn't really a great indicator of how great this team is.
Yeah, I mean they are 5-3 right now, but they are still stacked with talent because those 3 losses are to 3 pretty good teams. And like you said, it is kind of ridiculous they're this high in the polls still. I have no idea why they're ranked that high with the record they have, but we'll probably see them drop once the rankings come out tomorrow night.
It's similar to the Sooners.
Yeah, exactly. But it was an excellent game. Got to give Clemson the credit for going into a tough environment, rowdy environment at Bobby Dodd Stadium in Tallahassee. You don't just waltz in there and walk out with the victory. But the Clemson Tigers, they pounded their way to the victory at Florida State this week. Another closer than expected game this week was Washington at Utah. Washington won on a punt return inside the last few minutes of the fourth quarter. Utah driving down the field, had a 4th and 10, had the chance to throw it into the end zone with about 50 seconds left, but their quarterback Troy Williams threw it out of the back of the end zone, and the game was over at that point. But my pick of Utah upsetting Washington almost came true. Jordan, were you surprised at how close this game was?
I was. I really hate Utah. They are just so overrated this year. They've pulled out a lot of games. I'll give them credit. If you look strictly at their record, then they deserve to be where they are. But they're also very close victories against teams that really should not be in the fight with them. But on the same coin, they're playing great teams and also playing close against them, like a Washington. And so I was shocked whenever I saw how close that game was, and a little bit scared. I knew that I needed to win the Texas Tech and the Washington game to jump ahead of you on the season series, and both of those came down to the wire. Could have gone either way in either game. Probably should have gone to TCU in the TCU Texas Tech game, but
yeah, if TCU had a kicker, they would have won quite a few more games this year.
And I was sitting and watching the game with my dad, and I said, "Dad, good for Texas Tech, or it's good for Texas Tech that TCU is not good in double overtime," as alluding to the Arkansas game earlier in the year, where obviously the Razorbacks won. But like you said, the kicking situation is bad. But getting back to this Washington game, Jake Browning is really solidifying himself as a player that should deserve to go to New York. Now, he's not going to get the Heisman Trophy. That's almost certainly locked up for Lamar Jackson. But he's putting up great numbers and flying under the radar whenever he really should be getting a lot more attention. And whether that's the Pac-12 after dark effect or just the fact that Washington hasn't been a powerhouse, I don't know. But they've got something cooking, something brewing there in Washington. And come college football playoff time, the Crimson Tide, they're going to have their hands full against this Washington Huskies team. Anytime you have a coach like Chris Peterson, it's going to be a dogfight, no pun intended, on the Huskies. But this is a great Washington team and a Utah team that they'll come to play anybody. Now, they also play down to their competition, but they'll play up to their competition. And I guess that's a coaching thing. They really need to get a handle on that and get them to play up to the competition or higher than the competition week in and week out, because you can't play close games against subpar teams like they have so far this season.
Yeah, I'd have to disagree with you a little bit there. I'm not as big on Jake Browning as you are. I think he's an excellent game manager. He's great at what he does, but I would not say he's a Heisman contender. If anything, Myles Gaskin, their running back, should be the one receiving Heisman praise on their team. But that's just my opinion.
Jake Browning's responsible for 33 touchdowns this year. You don't think that deserves even a trip to New York?
He deserves. He's a solid top 6 or 7, but I think there are more deserving people, in my opinion. Lamar Jackson, Jabril Peppers, just to name a few.
Well, Miles, you can have more than 2 people go. I would also have those 2 going to New York.
Well, those were just the 2 names I came up with off the top of my head. But I'm sure if you gave me time, I could think of more.
Speaking of, now this isn't a Heisman caliber player, but this is one of the better players on a roster. Jalen Hurd is transferring from Tennessee. I saw that today.
News. He wants to play like tight end or defensive back or something at his new school, but that is mid-season transfer. That is quite something and it seems the wheels are finally starting to fall off the Tennessee bandwagon.
Definitely. And the Derek Dooley curse is still alive and well. I would not be surprised if they didn't go bowling this year. I think they will, but I wouldn't be surprised if it came down to that, because you have a Kentucky team that they could easily win the SEC East. So they've already played Alabama and lost to them, and I don't know. Oh, and they beat Mississippi State, so they've played their two Western foes. They've only got to take care of business in the East, and really Florida is the only contender. So you could see a Kentucky team possibly make the SEC championship game, which would just be unheard of.
It would be a peak SEC East, wouldn't it?
Yes.
If a Kentucky team made it to the SEC championship. But like you said, they have a chance. They're sitting at 5-3 right now with two conference losses to Florida and Alabama. But Georgia, Tennessee are certainly two winnable conference games if Florida slips up a couple times.
Yeah, and Florida has to travel to Arkansas and play LSU in that game that got rescheduled. So
yes,
that game is becoming more and more important, especially if they drop this game to the Hogs.
Yeah. Well, we mentioned Lamar Jackson earlier, but let's move on to his team in action this week. Louisville had quite the scare from the Virginia Cavaliers. They were down 25-18 with about a minute 50 to go. No, 25-24. My apologies. With about a minute 50 to go after Virginia scored, attempted the 2-point conversion, converted, took the 1-point lead, but Lamar Jackson marched his team right down the field. They scored a touchdown with 15 seconds left. 2-point conversion was good. They didn't need that comfort, though, because Virginia couldn't do anything in the last 15 seconds of the game. So Louisville survives. But another week of kind of a lackluster performance from the Cardinals.
Yeah, and it's really looking more and more like Lamar Jackson is just the whole team. And the defense played well. They didn't give up too many yards, only 322, which 300 yards a game given up on defense is pretty standard. So their defense is playing well, but it looks like nobody on their offense is even giving any effort. They just think Lamar Jackson's able to handle their whole offense. And with him being their leading rusher and passer, and I'm surprised he's not their leading receiver, I really don't know what the skill position players at Louisville are thinking. Bobby Petrino's got to be he's got to be fuming right now. And he probably always is. He always seems angry. He's probably got another scandal going on. But and maybe that's why the other players are distracted, because they know about all of his scandals, and Lamar Jackson hasn't had the news broken to him yet. But the rest of this offense needs to step up. Their running game was phenomenal at the beginning of the year, almost unstoppable, and that's what made Lamar Jackson an even greater player. But Lamar Jackson, since he's leading the team in rushing and passing, he's really not getting a whole lot of help from his team on the offensive side.
And this is Lamar Jackson, the great player he is, he can't do it all by himself. And we saw them struggle against Virginia this week. They struggled against Duke a few weeks ago. They've really got if they want to have a shot to make it into the college football playoff, they've really got to get these style points and start blowing out these teams, winning in bigger fashion than they currently are. Because their playoff chances with Clemson going undefeated, and now Houston, which was going to be their next marquee game, Houston dropping their last two and probably should be their last three, or rather Houston's dropped their last 2 out of 3, and the one they won should have been 3 out of 3. But it's not, the playoff chances are not looking so good for Louisville anymore, but they definitely could get an at-large bid to a New Year's Six Bowl.
So, Miles, in one of our earlier episodes, either the first or the second, we gave our way too early college football playoff predictions. So I want to ask you to restate your college football playoff prediction from earlier, and then throw in what changes you would make at this point in time.
Let's see. Who did I go with? I went with Alabama, Ohio State. Let's see.
Stanford.
I went with Stanford. That was a miss. And
Clemson.
Clemson. Let's see. Obviously, Stanford is out of there. I'm going to keep Clemson or Alabama and Clemson, but I'm going to go over to your side. I'm going to say that Michigan is going to get into the college football playoff.
You come to the light.
Yes, I have. And for my final spot, I'm going to pick the Cowboys of Oklahoma State. I believe, I have faith that anything can happen in college football. And I believe that Washington will get upset by Washington State in the Apple Cup, dropping Washington out of the college football playoff, and Oklahoma State will get in.
Wow. That seems a little far-fetched, Miles. Maybe a little homerish. I understand. I also have Arkansas.
There is no bias in that pick whatsoever. It is all objective.
I have Arkansas making it easily as the number 1 seed. No, for me, I picked Alabama and Stanford, and I had Houston or Louisville. I believe I sided more with Houston at the time, and then Michigan. And so I definitely have Alabama and Michigan up at the top still. I think they're by far the 2 best teams in the country. And then third, I'm going to have a little bit of a move. I want Washington at number 3. I think Clemson's going to drop one late in the season. They could even drop one to South Carolina, who's an awful team. Really, really a horrible team. Will Muschamp is not doing a great job there. And then for that 4th spot, I think Louisville's going to sneak in. I think, especially if Clemson drops out, it's almost guaranteed that they sneak in. So the rest of my playoff predictions essentially hinge on the fact that Clemson loses another game or loses their first game. And based on the way they've played this year, I think that's very likely.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you. I guess we'll just have to see how this pans out. But of course, we all know that OSU will be making the college football playoff.
Well, of course.
And going on to win, beating Alabama in the title game.
Well, they won't even get to play. They'll play Alabama in the first game.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Of course, they'll destroy Alabama in the semifinal, and then whatever poor team has to face them in the championship game will just get swept aside.
I'm sure both teams will be trading safeties to try and not play the Cowboys.
Whoever has the ball last is going to be the real winner because they'll be able to lose the game.
Yes.
Let's move on to some Big Ten action. Big Ten football. We love that. Not really. This one, a little bit more high scoring than your typical Big Ten game. The Wisconsin Badgers beat the Nebraska Cornhuskers 23-17 in overtime. Exhilarating Big Ten football. But Nebraska came into this game undefeated, and it was a lot closer than I was really anticipating. I thought Wisconsin would really blow the doors off of them. But given Nebraska credit, they came back from 10 down in the 4th quarter to send it to overtime. But Wisconsin scores the touchdown. They missed the extra point, but Nebraska wasn't able to capitalize, and they go home with their first loss.
Yeah, and we both foresaw this game ending with a Wisconsin victory, but I don't think either of us, I guess I can say with certainty, neither of us thought that this game was going to be as close as it was. And like you said, this was a tale of 2 prolific offenses by Big 12 or by Big 10 standards. I apologize. They both got over 300 total yards, which is just incredible for the Big 10. They're usually in the mid 250s, maybe low 260s. I'm kidding, of course. The offenses are not anything special. I thought that both of these quarterbacks were solid quarterbacks coming into the game, but looking at the stats afterwards and watching the game, Tommy Armstrong was 12 of 31, which is far below 50%, with 2 interceptions, no touchdowns, and only 153 yards. And on the other side, I guess the completion percentage is better. He was 10 for 16. Alex Hornibrook, the quarterback for Wisconsin, was 10 for 16, but only 71 yards and only 1 touchdown with an interception. So this game really came down to the running game, and you'd be surprised. A lot of people thought, including myself, that Corey Clement would come in and dominate the running game, but it was really Dare Ogunbowale who was able to come in, get his senior moment against this Nebraska Cornhuskers team that was undefeated coming into the game, and he was really able to carry the Wisconsin Badgers to victory. And this was a guy that really hasn't had a whole lot of touches this season, only 64 touches, 338 yards and 2 touchdowns, a lot of that coming in this game. So really, no one that we thought would perform well performed well, and there were a lot of surprises and guys that were able to perform well.
Yeah, nice pronunciation on that name, by the way.
Thank you.
But you're right. It was kind of a surprising game. Nebraska played better than we were expecting, but in the end, Wisconsin was able to win this week in overtime after they dropped the game to Ohio State 2 weeks ago.
And this game, it really just seemed like both of these teams played poorly. And maybe it's just looking at the stat line that made it feel that way, but even watching the game, I like to see a little bit more offense out of the two teams on the field. And it's different when you have two dominating defenses, but this was just two offenses that really had no star power. And so it wasn't an exciting game to watch. And that's almost it's comical how often the two teams are really just not star powered, and they don't have a player that they can go to at any given time to make a play for them.
Yeah, it really comes down to total team football and who's able to put the most complete game together. Sometimes you have to just ride your defense and hope they take you to the win, and that's exactly what each of these teams tried to do this week. But that strategy can only get you so far. Once you go up against a good offense, that can get you in trouble. But luckily, both of these teams don't have an offense, so it benefited both of them. Let's go on to probably the most surprising result of the entire weekend. Baylor going down to Austin, Texas to take on the 3-4 Texas Longhorns. And the Longhorns upset Baylor, the number 8 Baylor Bears, 35-34 with a field goal with less than a minute left. This was shocking.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, we expect a collapse from Baylor in the end of the season, but not against a team that's been as bad as the Texas Longhorns have been. And really, this is not a team effort. This is an effort of two brothers that really came together and were able to almost single-handedly, or I guess quadruple-handedly, since they both have two hands, almost quadruple-handedly take down this Baylor team. And that's Deontay Foreman, the running back for Texas, who had 32 carries for 250 yards and 2 touchdowns, which is just mind-boggling. And then his brother, another Foreman, obviously, this is our Monty Foreman, the junior wide receiver. He was able to get a lot of catches for big yards and averaging 36 yards a catch. That's not common, especially for a Texas offense. So he made up just about half of Shane Buechele's yards. And really, the Foreman brothers are who Charlie Strong should be thanking right now, because he's putting a little bit of doubt in the AD's mind, who almost certainly was going to fire Charlie Strong. And now there's an argument for him that if he wins out, he shouldn't be fired. But I can see if he wins out and wins the bowl game, maybe you give him one more year, but you've got to talk to him about the way he starts the season, because you can't start so awful in conference play, and especially if you're a perennial powerhouse like Texas is. You can't start so horribly in conference play and expect to be kept for very long.
Yeah, I don't see him being kept after this year. They've lost all their marquee games except for Baylor, but they don't really have a marquee opponent left on their schedule. West Virginia, but a little bit of that luster has been worn off after their loss to OSU this weekend. But they've already lost to OSU, lost to OU, were upset at California. I don't see him being kept around unless he just wins the rest of his games in dominating fashion and shows that he's bringing momentum in the next season. But on the flip side of them, him keeping his jobs, I definitely could. There is a possibility they don't go to a bowl this year, because they go at Texas Tech, have West Virginia and TCU at home, and they go at Kansas, which is presumably a gimme victory. But you could also be looking at the situation where they lose 3 out of those 4 games and aren't able to go bowling.
And if they don't go bowling and you live in Austin, you might want to sell your home and flee as quickly as possible because the town will be set aflame. It's not going to be good. They do have that gimme win against Kansas, presumably. But again, this Kansas team, while they haven't scored a whole lot, their defense has played fairly well. So if they can find something and get something going on offense, they could be a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, and well, that'll start this weekend when they play Texas Tech, and the talking has already started between these two teams as Brecken Hager plays defense for the Longhorns. He says, quote, "We've got to take him out," when referencing Patrick Mahomes. So it looks like the Texas defense is going to be actively trying to injure Patrick Mahomes, according to this quote.
Yep, this is a classic Texas move. I just can't say anything good about UT. While they have always had a great program, it seems like they have consistently dirty players or players that go to the NFL and get in trouble quickly. Like Ricky Williams, for example, great running back, but he got in trouble whenever he was on my Miami Dolphins. So that particularly stings. But yeah, this is just inexcusable. If I'm Charlie Strong, I'm sitting this kid for this game. And maybe this is all coming from Charlie Strong. Maybe he's the one that said that they wanted to go after Patrick Mahomes in a violent and malicious way. But at the same time, you can't let your players say stuff like that. And unless you want something similar to what happened to the Saints a few years ago, whenever they went after Brett Favre, or whenever it came out that they were going after Brett Favre and other top-notch quarterbacks, trying to injure them and getting paid for it. So
yeah, Bountygate.
Bountygate, that's correct. Yeah, if you want something like that and some investigation coming into your school, then don't do anything about this. But I think you have to sit the kid and not let him play for this game because that's absolutely inexcusable.
Yeah, whenever you say, I say injure that quarterback, referencing Patrick Mahomes, you're just inviting your coach to take action against you. It's like the repeat of that. What's the backup quarterback for OU? Allen, was that his name? The guy that said that Ohio State's defense was basic.
Austin Kendall.
Thinking of Austin Allen.
Better quarterback than Austin Kendall.
Yes, much better. But maybe coaches should spend some more time teaching their players how to talk to the media. I know Mike Gundy does a great job of this. He doesn't let first-year players speak to the media ever, and that includes transfers. So Barry J. Sanders is not allowed to speak to the media this year.
And that means he never will.
Yes, he never will. But even older players have to take multiple classes and sessions on how you behave yourself in the public eye.
That's a smart and classy move by Gundy, which is why it's so easy to like the guy. He cares so much more about the kids and the program than the win. And he's really shaping men in Stillwater, which is something that a lot of coaches aren't as concerned with.
Yes, sir. And we'll see if Charlie Strong gets to continue to be able to do that next season, getting back to what we were talking about earlier. But let's move on to our last game of the week. The upset special dished out by Jordan Linderman. The Wyoming Cowboys win on a walk-off, not a walk-off safety, but they went on a game-winning safety, 30-28 over the Boise State Broncos in a wild finish. I don't think I've ever seen a game end on a game-winning safety. What were you thinking as you saw your prediction come true, Jordan?
Well, I was actually watching this game instead of the Clemson Florida State game because I knew that if I won this game, it was going to be big. Wyoming hadn't beaten a top 25 team since they beat Air Force in 2002. 2002, and Miles, I know most people in the sports sphere were thinking the same thing as you. I'm sure a lot of people thought, hey, there's no way this Wyoming team could pull out a victory, but thankfully I had the foresight to be able to predict this outcome. And Miles, I totally understand You were bandwagoning on this Boise State team. I'm just giving you a hard time, Miles. This was it was hard to call, and I on the podcast I even said pending injuries to Josh Allen and Brian Hill, but no injuries happened, and Wyoming went on to win the game. I felt comfortable throughout the whole game. It was never broken open by either team. It seemed that they were trading scores. At the half, it was 21-17. So really no, and 21-17 in favor of Boise State. So there was really no separation at any point in time. But I felt comfortable watching that game. I felt like Wyoming had a shot the whole time. And of course, whenever I saw that fumble roll out of the back of the end zone and then they recovered the onside kick, I was absolutely thrilled. And because of that game, I would like to institute a new segment in our preview of the next week, where Miles and I will both pick an outrageous upset that we believe has potential to happen, and we can track that. So, Miles, are you up for that?
Yes, that sounds great to me.
And feel free for you guys. Feel free to send in your outrageous upsets. We'd love to see what they are, and if you get some right, maybe you can make it on the podcast. But
yeah, you can be our guest picker, like College Game Day.
And we have a lot of people that have asked to be on the podcast, so you got to prove yourself first. We want to see these picks. We want to make sure that you have to have the credibility.
Got to get these upsets right.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, that concludes this week's review. Thank you guys for listening. Be sure to be on the lookout for the preview later this week.